This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome back to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam. I'm your host, and joining me, as always, is Dr. Richard Blackaby.
As always, good to be with you, Sam.
Great.
Although it's getting a little long here, you're living with us right now.
We are.
And working with us, too. So
there's a lot of...
There's a whole lot of you that I've been having in my life lately.
We've had an unusual amount of face-to-face time, and, that can be burdensome.
Yeah. Well, if you didn't have that cute little 1-year-old daughter living with us as well, it might put more of a strain.
Yeah. For those listening, Richard is... He's quick to say how much he'll miss our 1-year-old, but he doesn't mention my wife or I. So
I was taught if you have nothing good to say, just say nothing at all.
I can always count on you, Richard.
It's been great. It's Sam Carey bought a new house and getting it painted and some things done first, and so it's been kind of fun. A little camp out at our house for what we thought might be a couple of days, stretched out as those things happen.
Just a mere week and a half. Hey, it could have been a lot worse.
I went out running with my daughter this morning, so that was fun. Yeah.
All the perks of being under one roof. Well, something we want to mention at the top here that you've got coming up. It's called the Online Leadership Retreat. And it's a series of pre-recorded sessions on leadership. They're talking about leading change, self-leadership, organizational leadership, and ours truly, Richard Blackaby, is going to be part of this online leadership retreat. And we also have a special discount code for our listeners. Blackaby 10 is the discount code they can use to get, I believe it's 10% off the registration price. Registration's open now. You can go to onlineleadershipretreat.com.
Yeah, some very interesting, especially marketplace leaders. But Ken Blanchard has a presentation, so kind of a wide variety of leadership talks, and it'd be very interesting, very creative material.
Yeah, and it's a great way, anything like that, I think, is a great way to say, especially during these unusual times, say, hey, I'm going to, take this time to better myself, to improve my leadership. Almost take it to the next level, if you will.
Yeah, I like that.
So
and certainly now's the time to be getting fresh ideas. This is unprecedented, this COVID-19, and so this is a time certainly to be getting as much input as you can and different approaches.
Exactly.
Just because you're going out in uncharted waters, and so if you hear a couple of other leadership experts affirming some things you're thinking about, that just kind of helps with the comfort level to know, okay, I think I'm on the right track.
Yeah, it's never wasted time to improve your leadership, and now more than ever, it is a good investment. So we'll leave links to all that in the show notes so that you can find out more. So today we're following up on a series that we started many months ago, it seems, but it's on leaders in the Bible, and we've done. I think we've done Moses and Elijah, the only two that we've done so far. But this is part 4 for Elijah, so we've really stretched out his experience, and as we've mentioned in the previous episodes on this topic, Richard has written a book on this, that a lot of these principles can be found in Living Out of the Overflow, where we just look at the life and the leadership and the ministry of Elijah. And so now we're going to bring Elijah to a close in this fourth and final part of this series. So, Richard, what are the last lessons, I guess, from Elijah's life that you want to bring out that we can benefit from?
Well, there's certainly so many lessons, and we were looking at 1 Kings chapter 19. We got into that in the last podcast we did on Elijah, and so I want to just pick up there again, 1 Kings 19. And we saw in the last podcast that Elijah, back in chapter 18, has had arguably the best season in his leadership career. He's faced down 850 false prophets of Baal and Asherah. He's faced down King Ahab. There he is on Mount Carmel with all the nation's leaders. He's the only person taking a stand for God. Big showdown. God calls fire down, or he calls fire down from heaven. God sends it. And all the nation's leaders are crying out, the Lord God, he is God. And it's a resounding success. And then to top it off, Elijah goes up to the top of the mountain, prays for a 3.5-year drought to come to an end, and it comes to an end in a torrential downpour. And so he has faced down the false religions of the day. He has at least temporarily persuaded all the nation's leaders to return to the true God. And he's wiped out a 3.5-year drought that was crippling the nation.
I mean, he's basically the Old Testament equivalent of a superhero.
He is.
Basically.
And that's why he typically represents the prophets at their fiery best. And so you would think that when someone had that level of success, that they're never going to doubt again. If you can call fire down from heaven and it comes right when you need it to, or you call rain down from heaven right when you need it to, and the weather patterns, the skies open up for whatever you need from the heavens, what are you going to ever worry about after that? And so you would think that, but what we saw last time was that oftentimes you're more vulnerable after a success than after a failure. Failures tend to humble you. Failures tend to drive you back to God. They cause you to reflect and to look at what you're doing and to see if there's maybe not a better way. Success closes your mind. Success fosters pride. Success causes you to think that you don't need to keep working at things or learning or growing or depending on God or praying. And so for whatever reason, right after his greatest success, he's going to experience his worst failure. And a message comes from Queen Jezebel that she's going to kill him. And for whatever reason, that just strikes a chord in Elijah's heart, and he panics. And he ups and runs 100 miles all the way down to Beersheba, goes, fires his assistant, goes another 5 miles into the wilderness.
I think you mentioned this last time, but he fires him after the 100-mile run.
Yeah, it's like, could you at least let me go before? Now I got to walk 100 miles back to our home. But and he goes out and he says, I just want to die. I just want to die. And one of the things we did focus on last time is the fact that people can endure a lot as long as they still have hope. Yeah. So if you're pastoring a troubled church and you're facing all kinds of crazy stuff, but you still have a hope that things can turn around, well, you'll put up with a lot. Or you're leading a business and a lot of bad news is taking place, or you're in the middle of COVID and most of the news is bad, but you still hold on to the hope that things can turn around and you can still make a go of this business and your customers are going to be loyal and they're going to return. But if you've done everything that you know to do and things don't seem to be getting any better, that becomes demoralizing. Yeah. And I think that's what happened to Elijah. It's kind of like, if I could perform 2 of the greatest miracles in recorded history and people still want to kill me, the leaders that I'm counting on to finally change their direction and support what I'm trying to do, if they just get more angry at me, then what else can I do? I mean, how big of a miracle do you have to do before people finally believe and trust me and follow my leadership? And so I think at this point he's lost hope, and at that point he wants to die. He's in a fit of depression, and I'll tell you, certainly during COVID-19, there are a lot of depressed leaders out there right now, battling clinical depression and just various levels of depression, but discouragement. And so much of that comes from a lack of hope, that they're just not sure. I just heard yesterday of a pastor that had just been in the process of planning a church before COVID hit. And so they couldn't meet for a couple of months, and they just began meeting about 3 weeks ago, and not one person has returned. And so after 3 weeks, hoping that little congregation that he pulled together would all be excited to be back in fellowship, and they've had zero attendance. And he is at the brink of just despair. It happens all the time. And so Elijah, and I guess what I take comfort from in the Bible is that even the greatest have moments of discouragement. I look at that and I think if even Elijah could grow discouraged, then I'm in danger of it too. And as we saw, when Elijah keeps his eye upon the God of the heavens, he's at his best. When he starts listening to his critics, even if it's just one evil queen, it's amazing how quickly you can spiral.
Right.
And so I always tell folks, as you're leading, be careful who you listen to. You listen to the wrong voices, they will have you spiraling before you know it. And so then we saw that God just he surprises Elijah with an angel, and we won't take a lot of time to unpack that. Just to say, I do find it interesting that when the angel ministers to Elijah, the angel doesn't get into a long theological discussion, doesn't talk leadership strategy. He feeds him. He gives him water. He bakes him bread. He tells him to take a long nap. Can you imagine an angel caring for you that way, saying, "Sam, you're tired, just climb into bed. I'll do the dishes. Just rest. Just stay in there until you feel good again. And here's some homemade bread to eat first. And you're out here in a hot wilderness. Here's a nice cool drink. All that you need." And I just think two things that says to me. One is God really does care, and he knows us, and he has a 1,000 different ways to love on us. And sometimes it's funny, you could get like a rebate you hadn't expected. You get a little tax return, or you get this or that. They've given out your favorite freebie at Costco or something, but some days it's just like you stop and you think, God, I just needed this today. I just needed something special, something that lifted my spirit, and God just has a way of doing that. And I think you need to be always alert to notice when God is sort of maybe discreetly just letting you know he loves you. But you also notice that it's really hard to deal with leadership stress when you're tired, or when you haven't been eating well. And I've seen this. We've talked about this over the last couple of weeks, but I've been working and running during COVID, and at this point, I think I've lost about 26 pounds. And I'll tell you something. I have the exact same theology I had before. I believe the Bible the same way. I've got basically the same kind of routines I've had now since COVID hit. But it's amazing how much different the world appears when you are carrying less weight, when you have more energy, when your heart's in good shape. And so God begins by getting Elijah physically ready. And I'll tell you, when I see some people that are discouraged, and then you see that they're at least 100 pounds overweight, and they never exercise, and they get up and just to walk across the room, and they're breathing hard. I'll tell you, it's just hard. It's just hard to face stress and bad news and all the disappointment that life brings when you're also just physically in no condition to handle that. And so I would, and I'm not here to cast stones, because boy, I tell you, I've lost 26 pounds. I need to lose 18 more still. I over the years just packed on extra tonnage that I needed to get rid of. But but even just what I've experienced, it's enough to just encourage people to say, listen, I really want to encourage you. It's worth it to pay the price, and it's not impossible if you'll make the right adjustments. So then the angel says, okay, so then Elijah, you go to Mount Horeb, which we know better as Mount Sinai. And and that's about 200 miles, and it's going to take him 40 days. And it's estimated that at that time, walking in sandals in the desert, that the average pace was about 5 miles a day. A healthy man might cover about 5 miles a day. So it took 40 days, and he fasts during that time. There's no more homemade bread. And I think that's also interesting. He's about to have his most profound encounter with God, but it's preceded by 40 days of fasting. And again, I have fasted on a number of occasions, but I don't see myself as an expert in that. But I can tell you that if you really need a fresh touch of God upon your life, a 40-day fast might just be the ticket. And it's not so much about the fasting as what it prepares you for.
Yeah.
It's not the fasting that's going to change his life. It's the fasting that's going to prepare him for the encounter that comes. And so it says that he finally gets to Mount Horeb, and he goes into a cave, and basically he's just sort of ensconced himself in this cave, and now he's waiting. And I've always thought to myself, and again, this is just pure biblical imagination, but Elijah needs an encounter with God like he's never had before. And I mean, he's had some doozies already. So, but there's one other person that had a life-changing encounter with God on Mount Sinai as well. And of course, that was Moses. And when Moses was really discouraged as a leader, at a certain point, he said to God, these people are they're wearing me out. And basically, and if I were to kind of use the vernacular, Moses just said, God, I just need to see your glory. I need an encounter with you at a level I've never had before.
Yeah.
And so God, of course, says, well, you can't just see my glory because it would kill you. It would overwhelm you. But he says, I'm going to let my glory pass by you. And what it says is that God sort of put his hand over Moses and hid him in the cleft of the rock, and which another word for a cleft in a rock when you're on top of a mountain is a cave. And so I've always wondered, did Elijah, maybe just even subconsciously, was he thinking, because of course he knew that story of Moses well. Is he thinking, I need that same encounter with God that Moses had hundreds of years earlier? And I wonder where that cleft in the rock is. I want that same glory passing experience. And so he finds a cave. We don't know if it's the same one or not, but there he is. And sure enough, it says suddenly. And again, we've seen that word before, but the suddenness of God is always intriguing to me. You can prepare. You can draw near to God. You can prepare your heart to hear from God. You can prepare the soil of your heart to receive a word from God, but you cannot determine when God speaks to you. You don't ever set the agenda for God. He's the Lord. He's the Master. He comes to you. He speaks when he's prepared to do that. And so it just comes suddenly. And suddenly the word of the Lord came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And, God is so fascinating to me because if anyone could just make statements, it would be God. God never needs to ask a question because, of course, he knows all the answers. But so why doesn't he just say, Elijah, you're about 350 miles off course right now. The last time I gave you instructions, it was for you to run down from Mount Carmel to Jezreel. But what are you doing way down here on Mount Sinai? What God just says is very simply, what are you doing here, Elijah? And I find that in the Bible, God's questions are often very disarming. They kind of strip you bare. And throughout the Bible, God has had questions like, Adam and Eve, where are you? It's like, which exposes the fact that all of a sudden they're hiding and ashamed. Or, Cain, where's your brother? It's those questions that just sort of expose you. And there's throughout the Bible, God has those moments where he asks these questions. And it might even be, well, who do you say that I am? And the answers to God, if you have an answer to God's questions, then you have an answer for your questions too. God always gets right to the heart of the matter. And it's interesting because, with Job, one of the famous questioners, for many chapters, Job keeps saying, well, if I could just interrogate God, if I could just get God in the witness stand and I could ask him my questions, I could prove my innocence, and I could prove that I don't deserve to be suffering the way that I am. And then finally, it says God spoke in a whirlwind, which ought to have been troubling to Job right away.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he begins with a question, and he says, where were you, Job, when I was putting all the constellations in place, putting all the stars in the sky? Where were you when I was doing all that? And of course, once God's asked his question, Job doesn't have any questions anymore.
Yeah, there's not a lot of follow-up.
And after a couple of chapters of God giving his presentation, it's kind of like, I'm so sorry, Job. Did you have a question?
Yeah, let's get back to what was on your mind.
And at that point, it's like, no, God, I don't have any more questions. I'm done. And that's kind of what God does with Elijah. He just says, what are you doing here? And Elijah does have a response. And maybe we can get to that just after the break.
Yeah, let's stop here for a quick break. Now more than ever, the world needs great leaders. As a leader, now is the time for you to have a much-needed retreat that will bring fresh energy, new ideas, and practical insights to become a more effective leader in this new day. Registration is now open for the online leadership retreat. Use code Blackaby10, that's Blackaby and the numbers 10, to receive 10% off your registration fee. All sessions have been pre-recorded and will be available starting August 12th. Visit onlineleadershipretreat.com to learn more and to register. Links will be in the show notes. Well, Richard, you've taken us up to Mount Sinai with Elijah and God's questioning to him, and he does answer. So let's dive right into his response.
Yeah, we saw that God asked, what are you doing here, Elijah? And in verse 10, 1 Kings 19, Elijah responds, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of armies, which is interesting because he's about 350 miles AWOL at this point. And yet isn't it funny how and
he's speaking in the past tense.
Yeah. And he's going to go on, he's going to say, but the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are looking for me to take my life. And it's just full of self-pity, excuses. Of course, he
placing blame on the people.
Yeah, everyone else is not zealous for you, but I have been zealous. And of course, he's AWOL. He's hundreds of miles away from the last place God told him to be. And as we saw earlier, when he complains, I alone am left, the only reason he's alone is because he fired his staff person.
Yeah, and he chose that.
So a lot of his, and which I've seen often when people isolate themselves and then they complain that they're alone and they have no one. So much of our condition stems from choices we've made. And so now what's interesting sometimes with God is not always what he says, but what he doesn't say. And he doesn't respond to Elijah. Elijah's laid down all of his complaints.
Yeah.
And one thing I've learned in the Bible, and certainly in the book of Psalms, you can give your concerns to God. You can complain to God, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But God is not necessarily obligated to let you set the agenda for your conversation with him.
Yeah.
When you pray, you can lay out your concerns, but we don't even know most of the time what the real issue is.
Yeah.
And so God, he'll let you share what's on your heart, but then God, when he starts speaking, he gets right to the issue at hand. And so it's interesting. He doesn't debate him, doesn't meet him point by point. It says he said, go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence. In other words, if you need an answer for this discouraging time, make your way into God's presence as quickly as possible. And what's interesting about this is that God finds him in a dark place, in a cave. And before God begins to deal with him, he's going to get him out of that dark place. And so when he says, go out and stand on the mountain, what he's saying is get out of this cave. Now, the interesting thing about being in a cave is that no matter where you look, it all looks dark.
Yeah.
It's all gray.
Yeah.
And we don't know how big or deep that cave was, but Elijah may have only had to have taken 4 or 5 steps. And all of a sudden, he's out in a bright, sunshiny outside exterior of that cave. And, of course, everything looks different. Now, he could have stayed in that dark place and I don't know if you've ever tried to encourage someone who is in a dark place, and you're trying to convince them that life's not as bad as it seems to them. But if you're in a dark, physically a dark place, that you're in a cave, it does look dark.
Yeah.
And because everywhere you look, it's just grim and dark and gray and damp. But you take 4 or 5 steps away, and all of a sudden there's bright sun is shining in the sky, beautiful blue sky, birds flying by. You look out from that mountaintop, and you see all kinds of beautiful terrain as far as you can see. And now you talk to God. But now your whole perspective is different. And I've often said to people, I know it seems really bad right now, but you may only be 4 or 5 steps away from an entirely different perspective. Oftentimes, you're not that far away from a very different place. And sometimes you just need to hold on, or sometimes you need to get up. And by the way, God could have said, hey, you're in a real dark place, Elijah. Let me give you fireman carry here, and I'm going to just haul you out of this cave. And once you get out in the sunlight, things won't seem so bad. But you notice what God does. He says, Elijah, you get up, you walk out. You've got the strength to do that. You're not just immobilized here. You've chosen to be in this dark place. You can choose to get out of it. And he makes Elijah get up and walk out on his own strength. And when he gets out, then again, it says the Lord passed by. As soon as you are in the right place, it's amazing how quickly you can have a fresh encounter with God. And at first it says there was a great and mighty wind, but God isn't in the great and mighty wind. Then there's an earthquake. God's not in the earthquake. Then there's a fire, and God's not in the fire. Finally, there's a voice, a soft whisper. The King James calls it a still, small voice. And that's God. And a lot of people have talked about that. What does this mean? Why isn't God in the fire, the earthquake? And of course, Elijah, 45 days earlier, he experienced the dramatic. He experienced fire coming down from heaven. He experienced the whole mountain shaking under the awesome display of God. He heard all the people shouting, the Lord, He is God, the dramatics, the fireworks, the neon lights. He'd experienced all that. And after all of that, it took him one day to become discouraged and want to quit. We always seem to want the dramatics. When you go to church, it's like we hardly know what to do with stillness or quiet or soft music. If we really want to make people sense that they've encountered the power of God, then we get those kettle drums going and those electric guitars squealing and the trap set just unleashing. And wow, did we ever have an encounter with God? Boy, it was almost deafening. It was so loud, and the light show was incredible. And we think the more dramatic it is, the more of God we've just experienced. But the interesting thing, as I said, is Elijah experienced all that, and a day later he's ready to quit. Yeah. Today he's going to experience a whisper of God, and we'll never hear of him wanting to quit again. And the thing about the whispers of God is that they go right to your soul. They get past all the surface stuff. And God speaks right into the deepest places of your soul, and that's basically what God does now. And then he asks him the same question: "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It's almost like when he was in that dark cave, he wasn't ready to deal with that question. Now he's going to give the exact same answer, and God's going to ignore that answer just like he did the last time. And then you get down to verse 15, and it says, "Then the Lord said to him, 'Go and return by the way you came.'" And one thing I've discovered, a lot of times people get off track, they get far from God, And oftentimes the way back to God is down the same path that you took to depart from God. He goes right back the same way he came. And then God says you're going to anoint Hazael as king over Aram, or the Syrians. You're to anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And Elisha, son of Shaphat, is going to replace you. And so what God's saying is, Elijah, here you are about to quit, and your best days still lie ahead of you, not behind you. Now, if you had called fire down from heaven and ended a drought, you might think that your best days were peaked in the past. Yeah, just downhill from here. But with God, there's always something else. There's always one more thing.
Yeah.
And you don't want to quit when God's still got something else for you to do. And so, and the last one and the last point there is, Elijah, all these great works that you're going to do, but it's not going to be done until you've found your replacement, till you've invested in the next generation. And so he goes and he finds this big strapping farm boy, Elisha, and he's got to be a big boy because he's got 12 yoke of oxen that he is managing himself with his own brute strength. And Elisha is enthusiastic, because when Elijah does call him, Elisha throws a huge farewell party for himself, says goodbye to everybody, kills a set of oxen, burns up their yoke in the fire, and he's like, all right, I'm ready to go. Where are we going, Elijah? I'm all in. And I've often thought to myself, when we look at Elijah and an Elisha, we always think of it in terms of the older guy, Elijah, mentoring the young guy. Wow, that's great. The last thing he does is he sort of blesses this young guy and sets him up for a career as a prophet. But as I look at that, I sense that Elisha was just as much for Elijah as it was the other way around. I think that old, grizzled, discouraged prophet, when he saw this young buck all excited and saying, where are we going next? What are we going to do? And who are you going to tell off? And what king are you going to rebuke? And what's God going to do next? You wonder if Elijah, at least for a moment, didn't think to himself, I remember when I used to be that guy. I used to be all excited about serving God, and I used to be so excited about just what the next thing would be. And I wonder what happened to me over these years where I lost that passion. And maybe Elisha was sort of the way for God just to remind Elijah, hey, it's an honor, it's a thrill to serve me. No matter how tough it gets, it's quite a ride to follow me and be my prophet, my spokesperson. And so I would just encourage folks listening today, certainly one of the most important things you'll do to invest in the future is spend some quality time investing in the next generation, talking to them, taking them with you, explaining why you do what you do, giving them opportunities to spread their wings and try things. But I'll tell you something, before you say, well, I'm too busy, or that's too tedious, or can't fit that in, it won't just be for you. Or it won't be for them. It'll be for you. Get around young people, creative people, millennials on down, because they'll rub off on you. They'll keep you young. They'll keep you sharp and fresh. And so Elijah leaves this place. He narrowly escapes a crash and burn experience where he was about to quit and give up. And we never hear of that again. And, of course, the rest is history. He goes out in a blaze of glory. Yeah. And it's so much better to leave with fiery chariots swooping down to get you than huddled up by yourself under the shade of a broom tree saying, woe is me, nobody cares. He almost ended up there, and God spared him from that and let him end well instead.
Well, Richard, I've always appreciated the insights that you bring out of these characters in the Bible, and looking forward to the next character that we look at, the next leader in the Bible. And if you'd like to read more just of some of these insights that Richard has brought forth in this podcast and the other 3 podcasts that we've done on Elijah, you can pick up his book, Living Out of the Overflow. It's just some great insights, and we always appreciate it. So until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.